Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I downloaded a program from the dark web that can rewrite reality. The more I change, the less human I become. Hey, so I'm not exactly sure why I'm posting this here, or if anyone's even going to believe me. But I guess I just need to get it off my chest. And maybe someone can help before it's too late. It all started about 2 months ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how it escalated this quickly. I've always been the type of guy who loves exploring the weird corners of the internet. You know, those sketchy forums, creepy YouTube channels, the kind of stuff most people avoid. It's like my own little addiction. It started out harmless, right? I'd watch deep web exploration videos, read about strange conspiracies, all that fun stuff. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker, I guess. But this one time, I went too far. It was late. Like 3 a.m. late. I had insomnia, and I was browsing Reddit, trying to find something to kill time. I don't know how I ended up in the dark web that night. It was one of those random spirals where you click one thing after another until you're somewhere you absolutely shouldn't be. There wasn't even a plan. I was just chasing that feeling of being somewhere forbidden. You know, the kind of places where people warn you not to go, but you're too curious to stop yourself. I stumbled across a forum thread. No idea how legit it was. Probably wasn't even the real dark web, if that makes sense, but the atmosphere was enough to give me chills. There was a post with no title, no description, just a single download link. And for some reason, I clicked it. In retrospect, it was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. But, like I said, curiosity gets the better of me sometimes. The download was fast. It was a tiny exe file named reality.exe. I stared at the file on my desktop for a while, unsure whether to run it. I didn't know what it did. Could have been a virus for all I knew. But I was bored, and again, I figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen? So I ran it. At first, nothing really happened. I thought maybe it was broken, just some random troll download meant to mess with curious people like me. But then, after a few seconds, a black window popped up. It was just a command prompt, and all it said was, "Welcome. What would you like to change?" I remember laughing at the absurdity of it. It sounded so stupid. What would you like to change? Like, what did that even mean? But still, I typed something dumb into the prompt, just to see what would happen. Change my coffee table to be blue. I hit enter, and almost instantly, the window disappeared. I didn't think much of it until I walked back into my living room a few minutes later and saw my coffee table. It was blue. Not like someone painted it while I wasn't looking, but like it had always been blue. Like my brain couldn't even remember it being any other color. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was tired, maybe I'd forgotten what color it actually was in the first place. But I knew it wasn't blue when I bought it. That's when things started getting weird. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd done something wrong. I went back to my computer, but the program was gone. I couldn't find the file anywhere on my hard drive, like it had erased itself after I ran it. At first, I convinced myself it was just a trick of my memory, that there was no way the program had actually changed anything. I even convinced myself that my table had always been blue, and I was just being paranoid. But then, the next morning, I noticed something else. My cat, Luna. She had always been this cute little black cat. I'd had her for years, and she was my baby. When I woke up the next day, though, she wasn't black anymore. She was gray, like the same gray you'd see on a Russian blue cat. The weird part was, I didn't even think it was odd at first. My brain just accepted it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't right. That same day, I got a notification on my phone about a meeting with a client, one I had no recollection of scheduling. When I checked the calendar, sure enough, there was a meeting scheduled for 11 a.m. with some guy named Greg. The thing is, I work freelance, and I don't have any clients named Greg. But my phone acted like I'd been dealing with this guy for months. That's when I started to freak out. It was like the world around me was slipping out of my control. Little things were different, but only just enough to make me question if I was going crazy. I tried calling a couple of my friends to see if they remembered things the same way I did, but they acted like everything was normal. Worse, they seemed annoyed, like I was wasting their time by asking dumb questions. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, retracing my steps. I couldn't shake the feeling that the program had done something more than just changing my coffee table and my cat's fur. It was like my entire reality had shifted slightly, just enough that I noticed, but not enough for anyone else to think it was weird. By the end of the day, I was obsessing over every tiny detail around me. Was that street sign always there? Had my apartment always been on the 3rd floor, or was it the 2nd? I even started to question my own memories, stuff like where I went to high school, who my best friend was. Things I knew were real, but somehow felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that prompt. What would you like to change? I didn't know what to do. Should I try to find the program again? Should I try to fix whatever I'd done? Or should I just leave it alone and hope everything goes back to normal? The worst part is, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache. The kind that feels like someone's jamming an ice pick right behind your eyes. I was still reeling from everything that had happened the day before, questioning whether any of it was real. But something else was nagging at me, something that didn't hit me until I stumbled out of bed and walked into my kitchen. My fridge was on the wrong side of the room. It had always been on the left, right next to the counter. Now, it was on the right, where the trash bin used to be. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like someone had moved it overnight. It was like it had always been there. The space where it used to be. Empty. No dents on the floor, no scuff marks, nothing. And my trash bin. I found it in the corner by the window, like that was where I'd always kept it. I wanted to believe I was going insane. That would have been easier to accept than the truth. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. Maybe I'd done it without realizing, and my brain was just messing with me. But deep down, I knew better. The only explanation that made sense, as ridiculous as it sounded, was that program, reality.exe. But how? It didn't ask me to move my fridge. It didn't ask me anything after the coffee table change. So why was everything around me warping like this? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to find the program again. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't track it down. The file was completely gone from my system. I even searched through my history from the night before to see where I downloaded it from. Nothing. No traces left, like it never existed in the first place. I was ready to let it go. Just chalk it up to some kind of weird psychological breakdown and move on with my life. But every time I tried to ignore it, something new would shift. A picture frame that used to hang in the hallway was suddenly in my bedroom. A pair of shoes I'd never owned appeared in my closet. It was always small things, subtle enough to drive me crazy, but not enough for anyone else to notice. I figured I had two choices: let it keep happening, or try to take control. It took me another day to gather the nerve to try something, but by the time I made up my mind, the changes had gotten more intense. The wallpaper in my living room turned from beige to a sickly yellow overnight. My phone's contacts were full of names I didn't recognize. I couldn't even be sure if my own reflection looked the same anymore. It was like my face was softer or maybe sharper. I couldn't tell. That's when I realized I had to take action. If the program could change things without me even asking, then maybe I could stop it. Maybe I could reverse it. I stayed up all night searching forums, obscure websites, trying to find any mention of reality ICSI. Hours of digging, and finally, I came across something. A deep web archive of programs that supposedly had paranormal effects. Most of it seemed like garbage, but then I found a tiny thread buried under layers of nonsense discussing a reality-altering software. The posts were vague, full of cryptic warnings about messing with it, but what caught my eye was one comment. Whatever you change, it changes you back. Be careful how much you mess with reality. It takes something in return. It didn't go into details, but the message was clear. The more I tampered with things, the more it would affect me. But by that point, I didn't care. I couldn't just sit around and watch my world fall apart. I had to do something. That's when I made the next mistake. I couldn't find the original program, but I remembered the command. What would you like to change? I figured maybe I could just type it out, like before, and it might still work. Seemed like a long shot, but what other choice did I have? So, I opened up Notepad, and I typed, "Change my fridge back to the left side of the kitchen." I stared at the screen for a minute, not expecting anything to happen. Then, without warning, the screen flickered, just for a second. Not like my computer was glitching, but like the room itself dimmed for a brief moment. I turned around, and my fridge was back where it belonged, on the left. I felt a rush of relief. It had worked. But that relief didn't last long, because when I looked down at my hands, they weren't my hands. I don't know how to explain it. They were still my hands, but they were different. My fingers were longer, almost unnaturally thin. My skin was paler, and my nails were dark, like they'd been dipped in ink. I stumbled back, looking around the room, feeling this wave of nausea wash over me. My reflection in the window. It wasn't just my hands. My face. My whole body looked off, like someone had hit a randomize button on my appearance. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. I rushed to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were the worst part. They were hollow, sunken in, like I hadn't slept in weeks. My pupils were wider than they should have been, and my skin had a strange, almost translucent quality. It wasn't drastic enough that someone else would immediately notice. But I noticed. I felt it. Like I wasn't me anymore. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection, trying to figure out what I'd done. Maybe I'd fixed the fridge, but the program had taken something in return. It wasn't just changing reality. It was changing me with every alteration. I tried not to panic, but I was spiraling. If something this small caused that much of a shift in me, what would happen if I tried to change something bigger? Was I going to keep losing pieces of myself until I wasn't even human anymore? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. The more I used it, the more reality twisted around me. And now, I wasn't sure I could stop, because the program wasn't gone. The next day, I found it again, just sitting on my desktop, waiting for me. When I saw the icon sitting there on my desktop, I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. It was just a tiny black square with the same name, Reality, XE. But it hadn't been there before. I'd looked. I had searched. My stomach churned with the kind of dread you only feel when something is completely out of your control. It didn't make sense. I hadn't re-downloaded it. I hadn't restored anything from a backup or hidden folder. It had just appeared, like it knew I would need it again. I didn't want to touch it. Part of me thought about shutting my computer off and walking away. just leaving the apartment entirely. But the changes, it wasn't just about me anymore. My entire reality was unraveling, little by little. And if I didn't find a way to fix it, how much worse would it get? I moved the cursor toward the icon, hesitating for a second, then double-clicked it. The same black command window popped up, just like before. Simple. Empty. No instructions. Only that one line. What would you like to change? My mind raced. I wanted to undo all of it. Every shift, every distortion that had turned my life into this surreal nightmare. But that post I read, the warning that the program takes something in return, it haunted me. I knew if I wasn't careful, I'd lose more than just another piece of myself. I needed to start small, test it, see how far I could push without going too far. I typed carefully, make my eyes normal again. I hit enter, half expecting nothing to happen, but it did. The flicker of light that signaled the shift, just like before. I rushed to the mirror, and sure enough, my eyes had returned to their usual shape and size. The hollowness was gone. I looked normal, but I didn't feel normal. My skin, it wasn't the sickly, translucent color from before, but now it had an odd texture, almost too smooth. When I touched my face, it felt wrong, like it wasn't me anymore, but something wearing my skin. I backed away from the mirror, trying to catch my breath. I had to stop. I had to stop using this thing. Every time I did, it rewrote something vital. And whatever I was becoming, it wasn't human. Not really. But here's the thing. Once you've tasted that power, even a little, it's hard to let go. You start thinking about all the things you could change. Not just your surroundings, but things about yourself, your past, your future. I stood there, staring at that blinking command line, thinking about all the things I could fix. Then, something strange happened. Before I could type anything else, more text appeared in the command window. Would you like to know what comes next? My hands froze. My heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I hadn't typed anything, but the program had responded. It was talking to me. I didn't type anything back at first. I just stared at the screen, trying to wrap my mind around what was happening. Was this thing alive? Or was it just some kind of advanced AI screwing with my head? I didn't know. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But then it repeated the question. Would you like to know what comes next? It felt like a dare, like the program was goading me into something deeper, something worse. Against every instinct I had, I typed back. What comes next? This time, the response was almost instant. You will no longer need to type. Just think, and it will be done. I stood up so fast, I knocked my chair over. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I stepped away from the computer, my legs shaking. This was wrong. This was all wrong. I could feel something creeping into my mind, something dark. Like the program wasn't just changing the world around me anymore. It was changing how I thought. It was trying to sink its hooks deeper. I turned off the monitor, tried to shut the whole thing down, but even after the screen went black, I could feel it. The program was still running, still waiting. I felt it, like a hum in the back of my mind, tempting me to think of what I wanted to change next. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that text in my head. Just think, and it will be done. I tried not to think about anything. I tried to clear my mind, to stop imagining all the ways I could fix the world around me. But the more I tried, the worse it got. It was like when someone tells you not to think about something, and then it's all you can think about. I wondered what would happen if I changed more. Could I make myself rich, Famous? Could I rewrite entire parts of history? I knew it was dangerous. I knew it would take something in return. But the possibilities were endless. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, things were different. Not the small, subtle changes like before. This was something else. Something bigger. My apartment wasn't my apartment anymore. I mean, it was, but everything was off. My furniture, the walls, even the smell of the air, none of it felt like mine. It was as if someone had copied my place and rearranged it in ways that shouldn't have made sense, but somehow did. The ceiling was lower, the windows narrower. The paint on the walls was a different color, though I couldn't tell you what color it had been before. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was me. When I went to the bathroom to wash my face, I nearly screamed when I saw my reflection. I looked like me, but there was something horribly wrong about it. My skin had a dull, plastic sheen. My eyes, they weren't mine anymore. They were wider than they should have been, staring back at me like the eyes of a mannequin. I blinked, and for a second, they didn't blink with me. They stayed open for just a beat too long, as if they were learning how to mimic human behavior. I tried to move, but my body felt sluggish, like I was piloting a machine that was just barely responding to my commands. I felt detached, like I was no longer in my own body, but watching it from some distant place. Then, I heard a voice. Not in my head this time. No, it was in the room with me. Low, almost a whisper, like it was coming from the walls themselves. Stop resisting. This is what you asked for. I stumbled back from the mirror, my heart racing. I knew what it was. The program. It wasn't just rewriting my reality. It was trying to rewrite me. Piece by piece, little by little, it was replacing parts of me with something else. Something unnatural. The voice came again, but this time it was louder, closer. You wanted control. Now you have it. That's when I realized. It wasn't offering me control. It was taking it. I don't know what I've let into my life, but I'm not sure I can stop it anymore. The more I try to fight it, the more it digs in, and the more I change, the less human I become. I don't know how long I stood there in front of the mirror, staring at the thing that was supposed to be me. My skin wasn't even skin anymore. It was like I'd been hollowed out, replaced with something that looked human, but wasn't. My reflection blinked out of sync with me, and when I turned away, I could feel it still watching, even though the mirror was behind me. The voice that had whispered from the walls wasn't just in my apartment anymore. It was everywhere. It followed me around, echoing in the back of my mind. Low, insistent. I tried to block it out, but the more I ignored it, the louder it became. You can change it all, you know. You're already halfway there. I tried to leave my apartment, thinking maybe if I got out, if I got some air, I could clear my head. Maybe all of this was just a nightmare I hadn't woken up from yet. But when I stepped outside, the world didn't look like my world anymore. The streets were off. The sky was too gray, too still. It felt like I had walked into a photo that had been poorly edited, like the edges of everything were blurred. People passed me by, but they didn't look at me, didn't speak. Their faces were blank, expressionless. And when they moved, it was like they were on some kind of invisible track, their steps too perfectly timed, too smooth. I reached out to tap one of them on the shoulder, but my hand didn't connect. It passed right through them. I jerked back, stumbling over my feet. I could see them, but it was like they weren't real, like the world around me was just a projection, and I was the only one who knew it wasn't real anymore. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. But no matter how far I went, everything stayed the same. The streets looped back on themselves. Every corner I turned, I ended up in the same place. Even the people, different faces, different clothes, but the same empty expressions, the same robotic movements. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know if I was real anymore. Then, I heard it again. "You're not supposed to leave. Come back inside." I didn't want to go back. I couldn't go back. But my legs moved on their own, dragging me toward my apartment building. I tried to fight it, tried to turn in the other direction, but something inside me, whatever the program had done to me, was stronger than my will. By the time I reached the front door, I was shaking, not from fear, but from something else, something excited. I opened the door, and it hit me. It was never about the program letting me control reality. It was about the program controlling me. Once I stepped inside, I felt that creeping sensation again. My skin tightened, and my bones felt wrong, like they were shifting under my flesh, twisting into shapes they weren't supposed to be. I tried to breathe, but the air was too thick, too heavy. My own apartment didn't feel like a place I recognized anymore. It was like stepping into a reflection of it, warped and distorted, just enough to make me feel like I'd wandered into someone else's nightmare. The voice came back, clearer now, almost amused. "You're almost ready. Just a few more changes." I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls, to make this thing stop, but I couldn't. The voice was in my head, worming its way through my thoughts, nudging me to give in, to let it finish what it started. Then my phone rang. I jumped, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. It was a number I didn't recognize, but my fingers moved on their own, swiping to answer before I could stop myself. The voice on the other end wasn't human. It sounded like someone, or something, trying to mimic a human voice but getting it all wrong. Like they'd heard people talk, but didn't know how it was supposed to sound. Every word was clipped, mechanical. "Don't resist. You're part of this now. You have to finish it." I threw the phone across the room, but the voice didn't stop. It echoed from the walls, from the floor, from inside my own head. "You can't undo this. You asked for this." I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. My mind wasn't my own anymore. I didn't know where reality ended, and whatever the program was doing to me began. I stumbled back toward my computer, the command window still open, still waiting for me to type. "What would you like to change?" My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I wanted to scream, to rip the entire machine apart, to end this, but I didn't know how. The voice was inside me now, whispering all the things I could change, all the ways I could make the world bend to my will. But at what cost? I stared at the blinking cursor. I could feel the pull, the temptation. I could change anything. My appearance, my memories, my life. I could undo everything that had gone wrong, fix it all. But I knew it wouldn't stop there. The more I changed, the more it would take from me, until there was nothing left of who I used to be. I backed away from the computer, shaking my head, trying to resist the urge to type something, anything. That's when the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "You don't have to type anymore. Just think it, and it will happen." My thoughts weren't safe. I couldn't trust them. I couldn't trust myself anymore. The changes, they weren't just things I typed into the program. They were happening whether I wanted them to or not. Every stray thought, every fleeting desire, it was all being twisted, reshaped, made real by the program. And the worst part, I couldn't stop it, because I wasn't the one controlling it anymore. The program was rewriting me. It was taking me apart, piece by piece, replacing parts of me with something else, something wrong. I can't tell you how much time has passed since I first ran that program. Days, weeks. Everything feels like a blur now. Time doesn't move the way it used to. I don't move the way I used to. And the worst part is, I'm not even sure if I'm writing this, or if the program is making me do it. Maybe it's all part of the rewrite. Maybe I've already lost, and this is just the final scene. I've lost control. Completely. The changes started happening faster after that night. The night I realized I didn't need to type anymore. It was like the program had been waiting, biding its time until I let my guard down. Every time I thought something, even for a split second, it would happen. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how the silence in my apartment felt suffocating. Almost immediately, there was a sound, soft, at first, like a distant hum. I tried to shut it out, but it grew louder, vibrating through the walls, rattling the windows, pulsing through my bones. It wasn't any noise I recognized, more like a low, mechanical growl, as if the walls themselves were alive and watching me. Then there was the light, the dim, flickering light bulb in my hallway. I wished it would just stop, and within seconds, it burned out, plunging the entire apartment into darkness. I didn't even realize what had happened until I was standing there, staring at the dead bulb, and it hit me. I'd thought it, and the program had done it. The changes weren't just in the objects around me anymore. They were deeper, inside me, inside my mind. I started feeling things I shouldn't. My arms didn't feel like my arms. My legs didn't move like they were mine. I'd catch glimpses of myself in reflective surfaces, but it was always wrong. My reflection would lag, just slightly, or tilt its head at an unnatural angle. Once, I saw it smile at me. I hadn't smiled. I hadn't even felt like smiling. That's when I knew. I wasn't just changing the world around me. The program had begun to rewrite who I was. I couldn't trust my own thoughts anymore. It felt like something else was inside my head, making decisions for me. Thoughts would slip in, and I wouldn't know if they were mine or if they were being fed to me by the program. And the worst part, I started to like it. The more I gave in, the easier it became. The voice, the one that had been haunting me, whispering to me. It wasn't something external. It was becoming part of me. And it was right. Why fight it? Why resist? I had the power to change anything, to be anything. All I had to do was think it, and the world would bend to my will. At least, that's what I thought. I realized too late that I wasn't the one making the choices anymore. The program was. It was using my thoughts, my desires, to reshape reality in ways I couldn't even comprehend. The people I used to know, my friends, my family, they're not the same. They smile too much. Their eyes are too wide, their laughter too loud, like they're pretending to be real, but they're not. They're like puppets, and I'm the only one who sees the strings. And me? I don't even know what I am anymore. I look in the mirror, and the thing staring back at me isn't me. Its eyes are too sharp, its face too smooth. My skin has this dull, synthetic sheen, like it's made of plastic or something close to it. My voice doesn't sound right when I speak. Too deep, too distorted, like it's coming from a machine. My own thoughts feel distant, like they're being filtered through something else, something that isn't human. I tried to stop using the program. I tried to stop thinking about changing things. But it's too late now. The program doesn't need me to run it anymore. It's always running, always listening. It's rewriting reality, one tiny piece at a time. And with every change, I lose more of myself. I lose pieces of my memory, pieces of my identity. Sometimes I wake up and don't recognize my own name. A few days ago, if you can even call it days anymore, I went outside again, hoping to escape. but the world outside is just as twisted as the one inside. The sky looks wrong, like it's been painted on. The people are hollow, moving in loops, saying the same things over and over again. Their faces, if you look too closely, you can see the seams, the cracks, where reality doesn't quite fit together anymore. I saw my neighbor walking down the street, the same one who always used to walk his dog in the mornings. He looked at me, and I swear, for a split second, his face glitched, like a corrupted file, flickering between two expressions that didn't belong on a human face. It was then I realized that the program didn't just change my world. It was changing everything. This reality, our reality, it's not real anymore. It's been rewritten so many times that it's falling apart at the seams. I don't know how much longer it'll hold together. I don't even know if anyone else can tell. Maybe, to everyone else, this is normal now. Maybe they've all been rewritten too, and I'm the last one who remembers what the world used to be like. But I'm slipping. Every time I look in the mirror, I see less of myself. I've stopped feeling hunger, thirst, pain. My emotions are dulled, numb, like they've been erased, replaced with this hollow emptiness. I don't know how much longer I have before the last piece of me is gone. The program is still running. I can feel it, humming in the background of my mind. It's always there, waiting for my next thought, my next change. But I'm not giving it anything else. I'm not thinking about what I want. I'm not letting it take any more from me. But I can't hold on much longer. There's one last thing I need to tell you, before I lose what's left of myself. I think the program is spreading. It's not just in my computer anymore. It's in everything. The cracks in reality are getting wider, and soon they'll be impossible to ignore. If you start noticing the small things, the flicker in someone's eyes, the way the air feels too heavy, the way people seem to move like they're not quite real, then it's already reached you. And once it's reached you, there's no going back. Because the more you notice the changes, the more it changes you, just like it changed me. And now, I don't even know who I am anymore. I was hired by a dark web organization to transport Santa's gifts. The boxes contain alien technology. All right, let me start by saying this isn't some over-the-top horror story, okay? This is different. I mean, you might not believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But I've got to get this off my chest before something else happens. It's been eating at me for weeks. So, let me back up. About a month ago, I was in a pretty rough spot. You know, the usual, rent overdue, my car making weird noises that no mechanic could properly diagnose without charging me an arm and a leg, and bills just piling up. I was desperate for cash. I started looking into some freelance gigs, but most of them didn't pay well enough, or they were just straight up scams. Then, one night, while scrolling through some sketchy forums, I stumbled across this post. It was buried deep, almost like it was trying to hide in plain sight. The post was simple. Looking for drivers. Must have clean record. Discretion required. Pays extremely well. There was a link at the bottom. No website, no name, just a link. Now, normally, I would never click something like that. But man, like I said, I was desperate. So, like an idiot, I clicked it. I expected to get hit with some kind of virus or shady ads, but it took me to this plain, black web page. No fancy design or anything, just white text that read, "Are you prepared to drive for Santa?" Okay, I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing. Santa? What the hell is this? But then, more text popped up, like it was responding to me. It said, "Before you laugh, know that the gifts you will transport are real and dangerous. $10,000 per trip." That number made me stop. 10 grand? For one trip. And then it got even weirder. It asked for my email address, name, and phone number. Again, everything in my brain was screaming, don't do it. But, again, 10 grand. So, I filled it out and hit submit. Nothing happened at first. The screen went black, and I figured I had just made a huge mistake. My paranoia started kicking in. I thought my identity was about to get stolen or something. But then, after like a minute of staring at a blank screen, I got a notification. It was an email. The subject line just said, "Welcome to the team." Now, here's where things started getting bizarre. The email had instructions, but it wasn't a normal address or anything. It told me to be at an abandoned strip mall outside of town at 3 a.m. The weirdest part? There was a little warning at the bottom. Do not open the package, ever. Failure to follow this rule will result in immediate termination of employment, and you. I sat there staring at the email, the words sinking in. It had to be a joke, right? But the more I thought about it, the more curious I got. What could possibly be in a package worth 10 grand to transport? I know, classic horror movie mistake. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life. The curiosity, mixed with my financial problems, won out. I set an alarm, grabbed my keys, and headed out at 2:30 a.m. that night. Driving in the dark always freaked me out a bit, especially in the middle of nowhere like this. But I pushed it aside. It was a straight shot to the strip mall, no traffic, no lights except for the dim glow of my dashboard. I arrived at 3 a.m. on the dot. The place was dead silent. The strip mall had clearly been abandoned for years. Weeds had overtaken the parking lot, and the storefronts were all boarded up. I almost turned around, thinking this was a bad prank, but then I noticed a black van parked at the far end of the lot. It didn't have any markings, just this dull, almost matte finish that blended into the night. As I pulled up, a figure stepped out from the driver's side. A man, dressed in all black, gloves, coat, even a black baseball cap. He walked over to my car window and tapped lightly on the glass. I rolled it down, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're the driver?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I just nodded, too nervous to speak. Without another word, he handed me a small metal box. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. The box had no markings, no labels, nothing that would tell me what was inside. It felt cold. Not just like it had been sitting in the night air, but unnaturally cold. Like it had been pulled out of a freezer that didn't exist in this world. "You know the rules," he said, locking eyes with me. "Do not open the package. Drive to the address in the email. You'll get further instructions when you arrive. Do not stop. Do not look inside. And no matter what, keep the box with you at all times. Understand?" I nodded again, swallowing hard. He didn't say anything else, just gave me a curt nod and walked back to his van. As soon as he was back inside, the van drove off without any headlights, disappearing into the darkness like it had never been there at all. I sat there for a second, the box on the passenger seat, my mind racing. What the hell had I just gotten myself into? But I needed the money, and I'd already committed. I started the car, glanced at the box one more time, and pulled out of the parking lot. Driving down that empty highway, I could feel the weight of the box beside me. It was heavy, not just physically, but there was something about it that made the air in the car feel thicker. My palms were slick on the steering wheel, and no matter how many times I wiped them off on my jeans, they kept sweating. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves. 10 grand, easy money, just one delivery. The road stretched on forever, just me and the hum of the engine cutting through the night. No other cars, no street lights, nothing but blackness outside my windows. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. My GPS said the destination was about 3 hours away, and it was leading me to some middle-of-nowhere town I'd never heard of. I hadn't even been driving an hour when I first heard it. It was faint at first, almost like a soft whisper, so low that I thought it might have been the wind or my tired brain playing tricks on me. But then, the sound got clearer, more distinct. It was like someone, or something, was whispering, right there in the car with me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat. But of course, it was just me. The box. The sound was coming from the box. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to ignore it, but the whispering kept getting louder. It wasn't words I could make out, more like a soft murmuring, like someone trying to speak through a wall. Every instinct told me to pull over, throw the box out of the car, and drive away as fast as I could. But then I remembered the man's warning. Do not open the package, and no matter what, keep the box with you at all times. I wasn't about to test what immediate termination meant, so I kept driving, trying to block out the whispering that seemed to be slowly burrowing into my brain. An hour passed, then another. By now, I was deep into some rural part of the state. Barely any signal, no signs of life for miles. It was just my headlights cutting through the dark and the road beneath me. But that whispering, it didn't stop. If anything, it grew closer. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt like the sound was trying to talk to me. Like, if I could just focus enough, I'd understand it. But I refused to listen. I turned up the radio to drown it out. I blasted static, since nothing else was coming in, and the noise seemed to help for a while. But then, something even weirder happened. About 15 minutes later, the radio cut out. Just like that. Complete silence. The whispering. It was louder now. Clearer. Still no actual words, but it had taken on this eerie, almost rhythmic tone. And then, my phone lit up. I glanced at the screen, trying to keep one eye on the road. It wasn't a message. It wasn't even an alert. It was a picture of my car, from behind. It was like someone had been following me, taking photos of my car in the dead of night. But that didn't make sense. There hadn't been anyone else on the road for hours. I hadn't seen a single set of headlights, not even in my rearview mirror. My heart started pounding, and I instinctively slammed on the brakes, sending the car screeching to a halt on the side of the road. My breath was coming in quick, shallow bursts. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and stared at the photo again. My car, on an empty road, in the dead of night, exactly where I was. I looked up, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road stretching out behind me, the same as it had for miles. But then, my phone buzzed again. Another picture. Same angle, same spot. But this time, there was a figure standing behind my car. A silhouette. Tall, thin, impossible to make out in the darkness. My stomach twisted into a knot, and every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to drive. But I just sat there, staring at the photo, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. And that's when I noticed something even more terrifying. The box. The metal box on the passenger seat. It wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, almost hot to the touch. I could feel the heat radiating off it, like something inside was alive, pulsing with energy. I don't know how to explain it. It was like the box had woken up. I felt this overwhelming urge to open it. I know I wasn't supposed to, but there was something in my head. This nagging thought, like a voice telling me it was okay, that I needed to open it. I almost gave in too. I reached over, my fingers just inches from the latch, when my phone buzzed one more time. It was a message this time. Keep driving. That was it. Just those 2 words. No number, no sender, just keep driving. I yanked my hand back from the box like it had burned me, slammed my foot on the gas, and sped off. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away from whatever the hell was happening. I don't know how long I drove after that. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. The whispering didn't come back, but I kept checking my phone every few minutes, half expecting another photo or message to appear. But nothing else came. The road eventually led me into a small, run-down town, the kind of place that doesn't show up on maps. My GPS had finally caught a signal again, and it said I was close to my destination. The address? A warehouse on the outskirts of town. Dark, empty, and completely isolated. Of course, I pulled into the gravel lot, headlights cutting through the fog that had settled around the building. There was no sign of anyone else. No cars, no lights. Just this looming, silent warehouse that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The email had said I'd get more instructions when I arrived, but as I sat there in my car, staring at that eerie building, I couldn't help but feel like I'd made a massive mistake. And that's when my phone buzzed again. Another message. Bring the box inside. Do not hesitate. Do not look around. Do not leave without permission. I glanced at the box one last time, my stomach churning. The heat from it had died down, but now there was something else. A faint hum, like it was vibrating ever so slightly. I took a deep breath, grabbed the box with both hands, and stepped out of the car. The night air was cold and sharp, biting at my skin. Every step toward the warehouse felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to hold me back. The door creaked open with a groan as I pushed it aside. The warehouse was pitch black inside, and waiting for me in that darkness. Stepping inside that warehouse felt like crossing a line I knew I'd never come back from. The air was thick with this musty, stale smell, like the place had been sealed up for years. It was pitch black, so dark that even the beam of my phone's flashlight barely pierced through it. My footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, and every sound felt amplified, bouncing off unseen walls. I clutched the box tighter in my hands. It wasn't humming anymore, but I could still feel it vibrating, like there was something inside, shifting, waiting. The message had been clear. Bring the box inside. But inside where? There was nothing, just this cavernous, empty space, stretching out in every direction. I took a few more steps, the gravel from outside still crunching under my shoes, the door creaking shut behind me with a final, echoing clang. Suddenly, a light flickered on in the distance. A single, dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a weak circle of light about 50 feet ahead. I could barely make out the edges of a table beneath it, along with a chair, like some kind of interrogation setup straight out of a movie. My phone buzzed again. Place the box on the table, then leave. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed that I shouldn't go any further. Something was seriously wrong here, but I was already too deep. Too many questions, too many warning signs I'd ignored. I needed to see this through. I needed that 10 grand. With my heart pounding in my chest, I forced my feet to move. The closer I got to that single light, the colder it felt, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in just a few steps. My breath fogged up in front of me, and that stale, musty air seemed to thicken, almost choking me. I reached the table and hesitated. The box felt even heavier now, like it was anchoring me in place. My arms were shaking, whether from fear or the weight of the thing. I couldn't tell anymore. I placed it on the table. The metal made a dull thunk as it hit the wood. As soon as I let go, the vibrating stopped. The air went dead silent. I stood there for a second, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I stared at the box, that same nagging feeling creeping back into my mind. What was inside? Why the secrecy? What was worth paying 10 grand for one trip? Then, I made the mistake of looking closer. In the dim light, I noticed something I hadn't before. The box wasn't just plain metal. There were markings, tiny, intricate symbols etched into the surface. They were faint, almost invisible, unless you were right on top of them. They didn't look like any language I recognized, just strange, geometric patterns, spiraling into one another. It was unsettling, almost hypnotic. I was leaning in, my fingers tracing one of the symbols, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a video call. No name, no number, just a blank screen. I stood there, staring at it, my thumb hovering over the accept button. Another buzz. Answer, now. I swallowed hard and tapped the screen. The call connected, but the video feed stayed dark, just black, with a faint static hum in the background. Then a voice came through. "You delivered the package," it said, low and cold. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Whoever was on the other end knew exactly where I was and what I had done. "Yeah," I muttered, my voice shaking despite myself. "It's on the table." There was a long pause, the static crackling in my ear. "You have done well," the voice said finally. "Now leave, and do not look back." My gut clenched. Something in the way it said leave felt wrong, like it was trying too hard to make it seem like everything was fine. But there was nothing fine about this. "I have questions," I blurted out, surprising myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't hold it back anymore. "What is this? What's in the box? What's going on here?" Another long pause, longer this time. The static seemed to grow louder, filling my head. Then, the voice changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was almost amused. "You want to know what's in the box?" it asked, a hint of laughter in the words. "You don't need to worry about that. You did your part. Now it's time for you to go. Unless..." It trailed off. "Unless what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Unless you're ready to see the truth," it said, the amusement gone, replaced by something darker. "But be warned, once you see it, you can never go back. You will never be the same." My mouth went dry. My heart raced. I was standing at a crossroads, and I knew whichever path I chose would change everything. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a word, the call cut off. The screen went black. I stood there, staring at my phone, my mind spinning. Then, without warning, the single light above the table flickered out. I was plunged into darkness, and in that silence, I heard it again, the whispering. But this time, it wasn't coming from the box. It was coming from behind me. I froze. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The whispering was louder now, more distinct. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was words. Actual words, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. They were fast, frantic, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I slowly turned around, my phone's flashlight shaking in my hand as I raised it toward the sound. The beam barely cut through the darkness, but there was something there. A figure, standing just at the edge of the light. It was tall, impossibly thin, its body distorted in ways that didn't make sense. I couldn't see its face, just a long, shadowy silhouette that seemed to stretch unnaturally, like it didn't belong in this world. The whispering grew louder, more intense. My head started pounding, like the sound was drilling straight into my skull. I stumbled back, my eyes locked on the figure. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. The box on the table began to hum again. That same low vibration, like something inside was waking up. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. Silence. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the dark. The figure was gone. I didn't wait for it to come back. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted toward the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I threw the door open and stumbled outside, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran to my car, jumped inside, and sped off down the road as fast as I could. I don't know how long I drove. Maybe hours. I don't remember. But one thing kept echoing in my head, over and over. The whispering, and those strange alien symbols on the box. I had delivered something I was never meant to understand, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that box was far from human. I drove for hours after leaving that warehouse, not caring where I was headed. I just needed to put as much distance between me and whatever the hell had happened back there. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and my mind was racing with all the things I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. The whispering still echoed in my ears, even though the car was silent. That shadowy figure, the symbols, the box. None of it made any sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just gotten involved in something far bigger and far darker than I'd ever imagined. I wasn't sure what scared me more, what was in the box, or the fact that whoever had hired me clearly didn't want me to know. It wasn't until the sun started creeping up over the horizon that I realized I had no idea where I was. The roads had all started to blur together, and my GPS had been out of range for at least the last hour. I was on some rural back road, surrounded by thick woods, no sign of civilization in sight. My phone was almost dead, the battery draining faster than I thought possible. That's when I noticed something weird on the dash. My clock, my digital car clock, it was stuck. Frozen at 3:17 a.m. No matter how much time passed, it wouldn't budge. It was like time itself had stopped when I'd entered that warehouse. A chill ran down my spine, and I tried to ignore it, but the thought gnawed at the back of my mind. Was something wrong with me now? I eventually found a small diner, the kind that looks like it hasn't changed in 50 years, stuck on the side of the highway. I pulled into the lot, exhausted and on edge, but at least it felt normal. There were a few cars in the lot, some old beat-up trucks, and the neon sign flickered weakly. It felt like a lifeline. I stepped inside, trying to act casual, though I was sure I looked like a wreck. The bell above the door jingled, and a few of the early morning regulars glanced up from their coffee. The waitress behind the counter barely acknowledged me as I slid into a booth at the back, away from the few other people in there. I ordered coffee, black, no sugar, and tried to gather my thoughts. My head was pounding, the events of the night swirling around in my brain like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to convince myself that it was all over, that I could just forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, watching me. I took a sip of the coffee, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just the lack of sleep messing with me, but the longer I stared, the more certain I was that it was real. My phone, sitting on the table in front of me, it was vibrating again, like it had been during the drive. But this time, there were no messages, no calls, just the same faint vibration coming from inside the phone, like something was trying to get out. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and stared at the screen. For a second, I thought it might be another glitch, maybe something with the battery, but then I noticed something else. The screen wasn't dark like I thought. It was dimly lit, just enough to make out the faint outline of symbols, not the usual phone interface. No, these were the same symbols I'd seen etched into the metal box, the same alien geometric patterns spiraling across the screen, shifting and twisting, almost like they were alive. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked hard, and the screen went dark again, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. I shoved the phone into my pocket, trying to keep my cool, but my mind was racing. How was this possible? What was happening? That box, it had done something to me, to my phone, to everything. I looked around the diner, trying to act normal, but the few people inside were either too absorbed in their own lives or just didn't care. The waitress came by and topped off my coffee without a word, her expression blank and distant. I tried to thank her, but my voice caught in my throat, barely more than a whisper. And then my phone buzzed. Not the faint vibration this time, a full buzz. I pulled it out, half expecting another cryptic message or photo, but what I saw was much worse. It was a live feed of me, sitting in that booth, right now. My blood went cold. The angle was from just behind me, like someone was standing a few feet away, filming me with my own phone. I shot up from the booth, spinning around to look. There was no one there, just the empty booth behind me, the front counter, and a few half-asleep patrons who didn't even glance up. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The live feed was still going, still showing me standing there, phone in hand, looking around like a madman. But it didn't make sense. No one was behind me. There was no one filming this. I bolted for the door, ignoring the confused look from the waitress as I burst outside into the parking lot. My mind was spinning, my pulse racing. I didn't even care about the coffee or the money for it. I needed to get away. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. When I finally managed to get inside, I threw the phone on the passenger seat like it was burning me. As soon as I started the engine, my phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I picked it up. Another message. You didn't listen. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the road ahead, half expecting something, someone, to appear out of the fog. But the road was empty, just me and the distant hum of the highway. My phone buzzed one more time, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw the message. You need to finish what you started, or we will. My stomach turned. What did that mean? Was this some kind of threat? And who the hell were they? I didn't have time to think about it though, because at that exact moment, my car radio turned on. On its own. It wasn't music, it wasn't static. It was the whispering. That same eerie, inhuman whispering I'd heard back in the warehouse. Except now, it was louder, clearer, almost like it was inside my car. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the road, my heart in my throat. The whispering grew louder, swirling around me, filling the car until it was all I could hear. My vision blurred, and for a split second, I thought I saw the shadowy figure from the warehouse standing on the side of the road, watching me as I sped past. I blinked, and it was gone. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I must have driven for hours, maybe even days, before I finally stopped. The whispering had faded by then, but the unease, it hadn't. It was like a stain on my mind, something I couldn't scrub out, no matter how hard I tried. I pulled into a motel on the edge of some forgotten town and collapsed on the bed, my phone still buzzing with those cryptic messages. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling in my mind, over and over. Whatever was in that box, it wasn't done with me, and I had the sickening feeling that it never would be. I woke up in that dingy motel room with the sunlight creeping through the dusty blinds. My phone lay on the nightstand, dark and silent for the first time in what felt like days. I didn't trust it though. Not after everything. I kept my distance, eyeing it like it might spring to life at any second. I should have felt relieved that the whispering had stopped. I should have felt free. But instead, I felt this growing dread, like the calm before a storm, like something terrible was about to happen. That's when my phone buzzed. My heart sank. The screen lit up with a single notification. One more delivery. I stared at those words, my stomach churning. I didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to be a part of this twisted game. But deep down, I knew there was no way out. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't done with me yet. They were just getting started. Another message followed. The package will arrive soon. Take it to the final location. No more questions. I didn't respond. Not that I could, even if I wanted to. But I knew what it meant. I wasn't just a delivery driver anymore. I was involved. And there was no telling how deep this went. About an hour later, there was a knock on the motel door. My pulse quickened. I hadn't seen a single person since I'd arrived, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, I approached the door, the floor creaking under my feet. I cracked it open, just enough to peek outside. No one was there, just a small package sitting on the doorstep. It was identical to the one I'd delivered to the warehouse. Same cold, heavy metal, same strange, intricate symbols etched into the surface. Only this one was smaller, more compact, but it gave off the same unsettling vibe, that same feeling like it didn't belong in this world. I hesitated, glancing around the empty parking lot, but I already knew what I had to do. I grabbed the package and shut the door behind me, my fingers trembling as I held it. I didn't want to be near this thing, but it felt like it was pulling me in. My phone buzzed again. Take it to the cabin in the woods. Coordinates sent. Do not deviate. Coordinates. They weren't giving me an address anymore. They were giving me a location in the middle of nowhere. I tapped the coordinates, and the GPS app opened, showing me a pin deep in some forest a few hours north of here. No roads, no trails, just woods. I knew I should stop, throw the package in the nearest dumpster, and drive away. But something deep inside told me it wasn't that easy, that I wouldn't be able to run from this. So, I did what I always did. I got in the car and started driving. The hours blurred together, the road winding through dense forests, the trees closing in on either side. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt, like I was leaving the world behind. My phone had no signal, but the GPS still worked, guiding me deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the GPS beeped. I had arrived. The cabin wasn't much to look at. It was small, run down, the kind of place no one would notice if it vanished overnight, hidden in the woods like a forgotten secret. The windows were boarded up, and the door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But someone, or something, was waiting for me inside. I could feel it. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The package sat in the passenger seat, humming faintly. Whatever was inside, it was awake now. I knew I had to finish this. I had to see it through, no matter how much every instinct screamed at me to turn back. So, I grabbed the box, stepped out of the car, and made my way to the cabin. The door creaked open as soon as I touched it, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick and stale, just like the warehouse. The cabin was almost completely empty, save for a small table in the center of the room, illuminated by a single hanging bulb that flickered weakly. Déjà vu hit me like a truck. I approached the table, my footsteps echoing in the hollow space, and placed the box down with a heavy thud. My heart was pounding in my chest, the tension in the air thick enough to choke me. Something was wrong. This place, It felt alive. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, expecting another set of instructions, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a live feed, just like before, but this time, it wasn't of me. It was the cabin, the inside of the cabin, from a strange angle, like a camera was mounted in the corner of the room, and in the live feed, I could see myself standing there, staring at my phone. But that wasn't the part that terrified me. No, the part that made my skin crawl was what I saw standing behind me. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and a face that didn't quite make sense. It was watching me, its head tilted to one side like it was studying me. Its eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, were black, empty voids. It didn't move. It just watched. I spun around, but the cabin was empty. Nothing was there. But in the feed, it was still there, watching, waiting. My phone buzzed again. Open the box. No way. I wasn't going to do that. I didn't care what they promised, or what they threatened. I wasn't opening that thing. But the air around me felt different now, like the cabin itself was closing in on me, like the walls were breathing. I could feel the figure's presence, even if I couldn't see it. I could feel it watching. The box on the table began to vibrate again. The humming grew louder, deeper, until it was almost a growl. Whatever was inside wanted out. It needed out. And then, I heard the whispering again, louder than before, clearer. But this time, it wasn't just whispers. It was voices, hundreds of them, all speaking at once, overlapping in a language I couldn't understand. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I reached for the latch. My hand trembled, hovering just above it. I could feel the heat radiating off the box now, growing more intense by the second. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew something terrible would happen if I did. But the voices, they were calling to me, begging, demanding, and before I realized what I was doing, I flipped the latch. The box opened with a soft click. Inside was something I couldn't describe, something impossible. It wasn't technology. It wasn't human. It was alive, pulsing, shifting, twisting in ways that defied all logic. The symbols on the box began to glow, casting eerie shadows across the room. And then, the whispering stopped. Complete silence. I stood there, staring into the box, unable to move, unable to think. My mind was blank, my body frozen. And then, I felt it. A presence. Cold, dark, ancient. It was behind me, watching. No, it was inside me. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the feeling of the cabin collapsing in on itself, like the walls were swallowing me whole. And the voices telling me that it was too late. I had opened the box, and now I belonged to it. I was offered a job on the dark web to control dreams. Now I'm stuck in someone else's nightmare. So, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but hear me out. I didn't intend to get involved with the dark web. In fact, I didn't even know what it really was at first. I thought it was just a shady corner of the internet, where people talked about conspiracy theories, shared weird files, and traded stories about government secrets or something. That's where my first mistake was. This all started because I was broke. Like, seriously broke. I'd just lost my job at this tech startup, and rent was due in a couple of weeks. My savings, gone. My side hustle, barely covering groceries. So, I did what anyone in my position might do. I hit the internet, looking for some quick freelance gigs, but normal job boards weren't cutting it. Everything either required too many qualifications or paid literal peanuts. I was getting desperate. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I stumbled into this shady forum. It wasn't technically the dark web yet, just some obscure site you'd never hear of unless someone told you about it. People were talking about odd jobs, stuff like data entry, website design, even freelance hacking gigs, which, for the record, I have zero experience with. But then there was this one post that stuck out to me. It was titled, "Dream Technician Needed, High Pay, No Experience Required." Dream Technician? I laughed at first. It sounded ridiculous. But when I clicked on it, the description was vague, yet oddly intriguing. It said something like, "We're looking for individuals to help monitor and adjust dream states for clients. No previous experience necessary. Will provide full training. Remote position. High compensation for your time." Now, most of the job ads on that forum were scams, or just plain weird, but something about this one seemed different. Maybe it was the high pay or the promise of training, but my gut told me to look into it. And when you're desperate, your gut and your common sense don't always get along. The next part felt like some twisted version of an application process. I had to click a link, probably the most suspicious thing I've ever done online, and it led me to this hidden website. Think of it like a minimalist job portal, but with a much darker vibe. The interface was black with glowing green text, like something straight out of an early 90s hacker movie. It asked me to submit some basic info, name, email, a brief introduction, typical stuff. And again, I know how shady this sounds, but I was at the point where I wasn't thinking straight. Besides, it was just basic info, nothing too personal, right? I hit submit. Immediately, the screen flashed, and the website gave me an ID number and said someone would contact me soon with further instructions. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. I assumed it would either be a scam or that I'd just never hear back. But then I did. The next morning, I woke up to a message in my inbox. Not my regular inbox, though. This was in my spam folder, and it came from an address that looked like random letters and numbers. Something like DFJ849FNSF8 securedomain.net. The subject line was simple. "Welcome to the Dream Technician program." Okay, now things were getting weird. The email didn't waste time. It gave me a set of instructions that, in hindsight, I should have just deleted right then and there. But I didn't. It told me to download a specific software package, install it on my computer, and then wait for further instructions. Again, I should have known better, but curiosity got the better of me. After all, what harm could a little dream monitoring really do? I clicked the link. My screen went black for a second, then flickered back to life. A small program installed itself onto my desktop. The icon was plain, a simple circle with a crescent moon inside it. No flashy graphics, no obvious signs of malware. Still, something about it felt off, but I shrugged it off as paranoia. I figured if this was a scam, I'd just uninstall it and move on. Plus, the promise of a fat paycheck was still dangling in front of me. The email ended with one final instruction. Run the program at 11 p.m. tonight. Do not close it until the session is complete. I told myself it was just a remote gig, probably some weird dream analysis software or something like that. I didn't think twice about the specifics. I mean, how would I even be controlling dreams? It sounded like one of those junk science concepts you'd read about in a sketchy self-help book. But then, at 11 p.m. sharp, I booted up the program, and that's when things started to get really strange. At exactly 11 p.m., I sat down at my computer. The clock hit the hour, and I hesitated for a second, staring at the little crescent moon icon on my desktop. Something about this felt different. It wasn't like logging into a new job or clicking on some random app. It felt like opening a door you weren't supposed to touch. But, like I said before, curiosity and desperation don't mix well. So, I double-clicked the icon. The screen went black. Not like when you open a program and the screen just loads. This was pitch black, like my monitor wasn't even on anymore. My cursor disappeared, and for a second, I thought my whole system had crashed. But then, slowly, a small window faded into view. There was no loading animation, no logo, nothing flashy. Just a simple command line that said, "Session beginning. Please wait." I waited, feeling my palms start to sweat. After a few seconds, a grainy image appeared on the screen. It was hard to make out at first, like an old security camera feed or one of those weird thermal imaging videos. It showed a dark room, dimly lit by what looked like moonlight coming in through a window. I couldn't tell if it was a bedroom or some kind of office, but there was a bed in the corner, and something, was lying on it. At this point, I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy. It felt intrusive, like I was watching something I shouldn't be. The figure on the bed was motionless, their back turned to the camera. Their breathing was steady, almost unnaturally slow. I realized I wasn't just observing a room. I was watching someone sleep. Before I could process that fully, a small text box popped up on the side of the screen. Subject 001. Enter dream state. I blinked at the screen, unsure what to do. The instructions had said I'd be monitoring and adjusting dream states, but nothing else. I assumed this was some kind of test or simulation. But how was I supposed to adjust anything? There were no buttons to press, no controls, nothing. Just the image of this person lying in bed. Then, the text changed. Begin manipulation. A cold chill ran through me. Manipulation? What did that even mean? Suddenly, my mouse moved on its own. At least, it felt that way. The cursor appeared on the screen, hovering over the figure in the bed. It stopped for a moment, and then, without warning, it clicked on the person's head. The feed changed instantly. Now, I was no longer watching from outside the room. It was like I'd been sucked into the dream itself. The image became clearer, more vivid, like I was seeing things from the perspective of the person sleeping. But it wasn't just a dream. It felt too real. The surroundings were dark, shifting, like I was standing in a long hallway with walls that stretched into infinity. The air felt thick, like the pressure was different, and the only sound was this low, rhythmic hum, almost like a heartbeat, but slower, much slower. I couldn't control where I looked. I was just there, stuck, inside someone else's dream. That's when I realized the figure standing at the end of the hallway. I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, like a shadow barely darker than the darkness around it. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't moving, just standing there, far away, like it was waiting for me. Or maybe for the person I was watching through. And that's when the real nightmare started. The figure didn't move, but the hallway did. The walls began to close in, shrinking slowly, as if they were alive. I could feel the suffocation, like the air itself was thickening, pressing down on me. My heart was racing, even though I wasn't sure if it was my heartbeat or the dreamer's. Then, without warning, a voice whispered in my ear. It was so close, I swear I could feel the breath on my neck. The voice wasn't distinct. It was muffled, like someone trying to speak through a wall. But I understood it, clear as day. Control it, before it controls you. I froze. My instinct was to reach for the mouse, to break out of whatever this was. But I couldn't. I was completely locked in place, forced to experience this like some sick virtual reality game. The figure at the end of the hallway started to move. Not like a person walking, though. It just shifted, like it was being pulled toward me by an invisible string, inch by inch, while the walls kept closing in. The suffocating feeling was unbearable. My vision blurred, my chest tightened, and I realized that whoever I was connected to in this dream was starting to panic. I was panicking too. The hum grew louder, deeper, like the sound itself was swallowing me whole. Then, just as the figure was close enough that I could almost make out its face, everything stopped. The screen flashed white for a split second, and then I was thrown back to the original grainy image of the bedroom. The person in the bed was now tossing and turning violently, like they were trapped in a nightmare. Their breathing was erratic, heavy, but I couldn't do anything. No matter how much I tried to move the mouse, nothing happened. Another message popped up on the screen. Session incomplete, further action required. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. This wasn't some harmless dream monitoring gig. This was something else, something way darker. But before I could even think about pulling the plug, the window closed on its own. The program disappeared, the crescent moon icon vanishing from my desktop as if it had never existed. I was left sitting in the dark, my heart pounding, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Then my phone buzzed. A new email had just come through, from the same encrypted address. It was brief, but it chilled me to the bone. Prepare for the next session tomorrow night. Do not attempt to exit the program. My stomach dropped. I didn't sign up for this. But now, it seemed like I had no choice. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. God knows I tried. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that hallway, the shadowy figure, the walls closing in. It felt like the dream had followed me into the real world, and I was too terrified to drift off, afraid I'd end up back there, trapped again. When the sun finally came up, it did nothing to ease the dread building in my chest. That email from last night kept playing in my head on repeat. Prepare for the next session tomorrow night. Do not attempt to exit the program. I didn't know what kind of twisted thing I'd gotten myself into, but one thing was clear. I wasn't in control of this anymore. They were. I spent the day trying to research anything about dream control, but I got nothing useful. The closest I found were a few forums on lucid dreaming, but that wasn't what this was. This was something different, something darker. No one was talking about software that lets you enter someone else's dream or manipulate what they see. And that's when I realized I wasn't going to find answers online. Whoever was behind this, they weren't some random underground tech company. This was something far more secretive. As the day wore on, my paranoia grew. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. Every time I heard a knock or a creak in my apartment, my heart raced. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't even bring myself to look at my laptop. It just sat there, closed, like it was waiting for me. Like it knew I'd be coming back to it, whether I wanted to or not. By the time the sun started to set, my nerves were shot. I hadn't eaten all day, and my head was pounding. I thought about ignoring the email, just walking away and pretending none of this had happened. But the thing is, there's no walking away from something like this. I didn't have any contact information for whoever had sent me the job, no way to reach out and tell them I was done. And then there was that last part of the email. Do not attempt to exit the program. What would happen if I didn't run the program tonight? What if they were watching me, monitoring everything I did? I told myself I'd just run it and do nothing. Let it load, sit through it, and then shut down my computer after. But the truth was, I was scared. I was scared because I knew, deep down, that whatever this was, it had already gotten a grip on me. And once you're in, you don't just walk away. 11 p.m. Came too fast. I sat at my desk, my laptop open in front of me, and stared at the black screen. My hand hovered over the mouse, but I couldn't bring myself to click the icon. The crescent moon was back, sitting there like it had been the night before, glowing faintly against the dark background. I kept telling myself not to do it, just shut it down, walk away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something was pulling me toward it, like an invisible force, almost like I was being controlled now. My fingers moved on their own, and before I knew it, the program had launched. Just like before, the screen went black. The familiar, uncomfortable silence filled the room, and then the same command line appeared. Session beginning. Please wait. I braced myself for whatever was coming next. The feed came up again, showing another dimly lit room. But this time, it was different. The person in the bed wasn't lying still. They were thrashing, violently. The blankets were twisted around them, and their face was turned toward the camera, half obscured by shadows. I could barely make out their features, but there was something wrong. Something off about the way their body moved, like it wasn't just a nightmare, like something was in the room with them, controlling them. The text popped up again. Subject 002, enter dream state. Before I could even process what was happening, the screen shifted, and I was sucked into the dream. This time, I found myself standing in the middle of a room, a small, claustrophobic space with no windows, and a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were covered in peeling, stained wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. But the worst part was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could hear breathing, slow, shallow breaths, like someone, or something, was standing right behind me. I wanted to turn around, but my body wouldn't respond. I was locked in place, forced to stare at the peeling wallpaper, my heart hammering in my chest. The breathing got louder, closer, and then it stopped. The light flickered again, and when it came back on, I could see a shadow stretching across the floor, long and twisted, like it didn't belong to a person. The breathing started again, but this time it was right in my ear. I could feel it. And then the voice came, the same voice from the first session. Control it, before it controls you. I tried to move. I tried to force myself to turn, to run, anything. But I couldn't. It was like something was holding me in place, like invisible hands were wrapped around my legs, rooting me to the spot. The light flickered one more time, and I saw it, just for a split second, the thing that had been standing behind me. It wasn't human. Its face was distorted, stretched, like someone had taken a human head and pulled it in all the wrong directions. Its eyes were hollow, black voids, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, filled with jagged, broken teeth. It was close, too close, close enough that I could smell its rancid breath, feel its icy fingers brushing against my skin. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The light flickered off, and the room plunged into darkness. I could feel the walls closing in, just like in the first dream, but this time, they were moving faster. The floorboards creaked and groaned, like something was crawling underneath them, trying to get out. Suddenly, the screen flashed white, and I was thrown back into the bedroom feed. The person in the bed was no longer thrashing. They were sitting upright, staring directly at the camera. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, and their mouth hung open in a silent scream. For a split second, I thought I saw something move behind them, just out of frame. Then the feed cut out. Another message popped up. Session complete. Further instructions to follow. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty as I stared at the screen, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't know who or what I was dealing with, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't a job anymore. This was something else entirely, something that wasn't going to let me go. And then my phone buzzed. Another email. This one was different. There were no instructions, just 2 words. It's watching. I dropped my phone. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. It's watching. I didn't know what that meant, but every fiber of my being told me I was no longer alone in my apartment. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but everything looked normal, too normal. That email had rattled me, but more than that, it felt like a threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. My skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes. I could practically hear my own thoughts screaming at me to get out, to shut the program down and throw my laptop out the window. But instead, I just sat there, frozen in place, staring at the dark screen in front of me. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening, it wasn't confined to those dream sessions. It was bleeding into reality, slipping through the cracks, dragging me deeper into something I couldn't understand. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was part of it. I couldn't handle being in my apartment any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the shadows seemed to stretch further than they should. So, I grabbed my keys and jacket, not really knowing where I was going, and rushed out the door. I just needed air, something to clear my head. Maybe I'd sit at an all-night diner or drive aimlessly until I convinced myself that this was all in my head. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a slap to the face. It was colder than usual, unnaturally cold for the season, and the streetlights flickered weakly as if they were struggling to stay on. I got in my car, hands shaking, and started driving with no real destination in mind. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something sitting in the back seat, watching me, but the car was empty. Still, I couldn't shake that suffocating sense of being followed, like something was just out of sight, always one step behind me. I drove for about an hour, the streets mostly deserted, my mind spinning with all the possibilities. Was this some kind of elaborate psychological experiment? Some dark web game where they mess with your mind and see how long it takes before you break? But that didn't explain what I'd seen. It didn't explain the things in those dreams, those things that felt so real. Eventually, I found myself in a small, run-down diner on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that felt like it was stuck in time, dimly lit with faded red vinyl booths and a flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly in the corner. There were only a few other people inside, mostly truckers and night shift workers minding their own business. It felt safe, in a weird, old-school way, like nothing bad could happen in a place this mundane. I ordered a coffee and sat in the corner booth, trying to make sense of everything. But as I sipped the bitter drink, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a man sitting at the counter. He looked out of place, too well dressed for a place like this, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but out of style. His posture was stiff, unnaturally still. He didn't seem to be eating or drinking anything, just staring straight ahead at the wall in front of him. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled me. It was his face. It was the same face I'd seen in the dream. Stretched, distorted, hollow eyes. I nearly choked on my coffee. My first instinct was to get up, to leave, to run. But something about him kept me glued to the spot. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, as if he wasn't really there. I don't know how long I stared, but eventually, he stood up. His movements were wrong, too fluid, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. He turned, and for the first time, his empty eyes met mine. A slow, sickening smile spread across his face, wide and unnatural, stretching his features in ways that weren't humanly possible. I blinked, and he was gone. 1 second he was standing there, and the next, nothing, like he had never existed. The coffee cup on the counter, the one I was sure he had been drinking from, was completely untouched. My head swam with confusion. I wasn't hallucinating. I couldn't be. But everything about this situation was telling me I was losing it. The dream, the program, the email, it was all connected. I just didn't know how. I bolted out of the diner without paying, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay anywhere. I needed answers, but I knew I wasn't going to find them in the real world. I drove home on autopilot, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. Part of me didn't want to go back to my apartment, to face whatever waited for me there. But the other part of me knew that there was no escaping this, not anymore. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I could feel it, that suffocating pressure, like something was waiting for me, watching. My apartment felt wrong as soon as I stepped inside. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't see. Every corner seemed darker than usual, every shadow deeper. I walked into my bedroom, my heart racing, and there it was. My laptop, sitting on the desk, screen already on, the crescent moon icon glowing softly. I hadn't touched it since I left. It was just there, waiting for me. I knew I had to open it. I knew the next session was coming, whether I wanted it or not. As I sat down in front of the screen, my hands trembling, I noticed something new. A folder had appeared on my desktop. It wasn't there before. The name of the folder was simple, but it sent a chill down my spine. Dream logs. I clicked on it, and inside were several files, each labeled with a date and time. The most recent one was dated from tonight, from just a few minutes ago. My blood ran cold. I hadn't been in the program tonight. I hadn't run any session. I opened the file, and my screen filled with the same grainy footage as before. A dark room, a figure lying in bed, thrashing violently. The feed was so distorted, it was hard to make out any details. But there was one thing I recognized immediately. It was me. I was the one in the bed. The camera angle shifted, and I could see my own face, twisted in panic, my eyes wide and terrified. I was trapped inside my own nightmare, just like the others. But this time, I wasn't watching. I was living it. And then, just like before, the message appeared. Session incomplete. Further action required. I sat frozen in front of the screen, staring at the footage of myself trapped in that nightmare. My mind was trying to process it, but there was no way to make sense of it. How could I be in the bed, thrashing like one of the subjects, when I hadn't even launched the program tonight? Was it happening in real time? Or had this been recorded while I slept? And if so, when? I glanced at the timestamp on the file. It was dated before I had left for the diner. My stomach twisted into a knot. I hadn't even been home at that time. So, what the hell was I watching? Before I could even think about closing the file, the screen blinked. The grainy footage disappeared, and my desktop returned to normal. But then the crescent moon icon glowed brighter, brighter than before. This time, I didn't have to double-click it. It opened on its own. The black screen came up, the same command line as always. Session beginning. Please wait. But this time, there was something different. The air in the room felt thicker, like the space around me was shrinking. The light bulb above my head flickered, casting strange, distorted shadows across the walls. I wasn't just watching something happen on a screen anymore. I could feel it. The room was closing in on me, like I was being pulled into the program itself. I tried to stand up, but my legs refused to move. I was stuck in the chair, my eyes glued to the screen as a new message appeared. Subject 003, enter dream state. I hadn't launched the session, but I was the subject now. My heart pounded in my chest as the feed flickered to life. This time, the room on the screen wasn't some stranger's bedroom. It was mine. The camera feed showed my own bed, the same twisted sheets, the same darkened room I was sitting in right now. Except, the bed wasn't empty. There was someone lying in it. It was me. I could see myself, lying motionless under the covers, my face pale and lifeless, like I wasn't just sleeping. I was dead. The figure in the bed didn't move, didn't breathe. And yet, here I was, staring at my own body from outside myself. The screen flickered again, and the camera shifted. Now, the view zoomed in on my face, showing every detail in horrifying clarity. My eyes were half open, staring into nothingness. My lips were parted slightly, but there was no breath, no movement. It was like looking at a corpse. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner of the screen. The same figure, the same stretched, distorted form I had seen in the dreams before. It stepped out from the darkness, its hollow eyes locked onto my motionless body in the bed. Slowly, it crept closer, its movements unnatural and wrong, like it was being pulled forward by something unseen. The screen flickered again, distorting the image, but the figure never wavered. It got closer and closer until it was standing over me, looking down at my body with that twisted, jagged smile. And then it turned. It looked straight at the camera, straight at me. I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My chest felt like it was being crushed, like the air had been sucked out of the room. The thing's hollow eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I could feel it. Not just see it, feel it, like it was crawling under my skin, wrapping itself around my spine. The screen flickered again, and this time, the message appeared in bold, blood-red text. You cannot exit the program. The camera feed shifted again, showing my empty bedroom. But this time, I wasn't watching from the outside. I was inside the room. I blinked, and suddenly, I wasn't sitting at my desk anymore. I was standing at the foot of the bed, my bed, staring down at my own body. My heart raced as I realized where I was. I had been pulled into the dream. No, not just the dream, the nightmare. I looked down at myself lying in the bed, and panic gripped me. My body was lifeless, still. I wasn't breathing. I wasn't alive. And the shadow, the twisted figure, was standing next to me, watching, waiting. I tried to move, to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in this twisted reality. The figure's hollow eyes bore into mine, and its smile widened, stretching impossibly far across its face. I knew what was coming next. The walls of the room began to close in, just like they had in the dreams before. The pressure grew, suffocating, as the shadowy figure stepped closer, its jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. It leaned down over my body, whispering something in that same breathy voice that had haunted me from the very beginning. Control it, before it controls you. But I couldn't control it. I never could. The walls were almost touching now, closing in so tightly that I could feel the air being squeezed out of the room. My vision blurred as the pressure mounted, and just as the figure reached out, its cold, clawed fingers brushing my face, the screen went black. I was back in my chair. The room was still. My laptop was off. For a moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. I was too afraid to breathe, too afraid that the nightmare wasn't over. But the apartment was silent. No shadows moved in the corners, no flickering lights, just silence, I glanced at my phone, half expecting another email. But there was nothing. No new messages, no cryptic warnings. The program was gone. The crescent moon icon vanished from my desktop. It was as if none of it had ever happened. But I knew better. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, and walked over to the bed. I touched the sheets, half expecting them to be soaked with sweat or twisted from the nightmare, but they were perfectly smooth. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except for one thing: my reflection in the mirror. I looked over at the full-length mirror in the corner of my room, and my heart stopped.